Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, not to a gilded palace or a bustling Roman forum, but to the vast, windswept heart of Central Asia, the Mongol Empire. Imagine you're out there now, lying on a thin felt mat in a round, smoky yurt. The wind howls outside, not with the gentle whisper of a modern fan, but with the cold, sharp cry of the steppe. You can feel the vibration of the earth through the thin floor, the rumble of 1,000 hooves still echoing from the horizon. The air smells of dried mare's milk, mutton fat, and the smoky tang of a dung fire. You shiver a little, even though you're wrapped in rough sheepskin blankets. Out there, under a sky so vast it feels like a cosmic dome, a new day is dawning. And with it a reality so starkly different from your own that you probably wouldn't survive a single day. The rules are ancient, the stakes are life and death, and your modern comforts are a distant, forgotten memory. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes, and for a moment, the world is a dizzying swirl of browns and grays. The light filters in from the tuno, the smoke hole at the top of the yurt, illuminating the crisscross lattice of the khana walls. You're not in your own bed. You're in a ger, what we now call a yurt, and it's already bustling. The matriarch, a woman with a face weathered by sun and wind, is tending to the fire. A young man, who you now understand is your new brother, is outside, the sounds of his work drifting in. You blink, trying to get your bearings, but there's no time for that. A sharp command in a language you barely understand jolts you to action. You're being told to get up, to help with the morning chores, to stop lying there like a lump of lazy modernity. You try to explain, to gesture, to tell them you're from a different time, but your words fall on deaf ears. They see a new member of the family, a bit soft, a bit slow, but a mouth to feed, and therefore a body that must work. You've been assimilated, and in the Mongol Empire, that's a common, if jarring, occurrence. You shuffle outside, the cold air hitting your face like a slap. The first thing you notice is the immensity of the landscape. It's a horizon that goes on forever, a rolling sea of grass punctuated by the occasional cluster of yurts and the movement of livestock. There are no roads, no streetlights, no familiar signs of civilization. Just grass, sky, and the endless wind. Your first task, a seemingly simple one, is to help milk the mares. This isn't like milking a gentle dairy cow. These horses are spirited, powerful animals, and you're expected to approach them with a quiet confidence you simply don't possess. As you fumble with the leather pail, the matriarch gives a short, exasperated sigh and demonstrates with practiced ease. She shows you how to soothe the horse, how to position yourself, how to be a part of this ancient rhythm of life. It's a humiliating lesson, but it's the first of many. This isn't just a family, it's a small, self-sufficient unit of survival. The whole community, the ale, is built on mutual support and strict hierarchy. You learn that in this world, there is no place for individual weakness. A sick animal, a failed hunt, or a broken wagon wheel could mean the difference between life and death for everyone. Your value is measured by your ability to contribute. Your strange clothes and soft hands are a liability. Historians still argue whether this close-knit family structure was a product of the harsh environment or a deliberate social engineering by Genghis Khan to ensure loyalty and cohesion. Either way, you're now part of it, And your survival depends on how quickly you can adapt. You remember a quirky fact. The Mongols didn't have a word for peasant or farmer because agriculture was something other people did. Their entire identity was tied to the horse and the herd. You are now, by default, one of them. You're a nomad, and the only thing that matters is the next sunrise and the long, cold night that follows. The sun is a pale, cold orb in the sky, and you're already exhausted. The simple daily chores of the steppe are anything but. You now understand that your life has a constant cycle of tending to the animals. The livestock, sheep, goats, yaks, and of course horses, are not just property, they are your entire existence. Your family's wealth is measured not in gold, but in hoofs and fleece. Your morning is spent not in a cozy kitchen, but out on the open steppe, guiding the herds to new pastures. You're learning to read the land in a way that feels primal, ancient. You're looking for subtle changes in the color of the grass, the direction of the wind, the way the animals themselves behave. A misjudgment could lead your herd to a barren patch, starving them and, in turn, starving your family. The stakes feel astronomically high for what you once considered a mundane task. You trudge back to the gur for a meal, your stomach rumbling with a hunger you haven't felt since, well, ever. The food is simple, but it is fuel. You sit with your new family, a bowl of fermented mare's milk, arog, in your hand. The taste is sour, a bit effervescent, and it's taking some getting used to. You try a piece of bortz, air-dried meat so hard it's like a rock. The idea is that it lasts forever, and you can break off tiny pieces to chew on for sustenance. You find yourself missing the soft, processed foods of your old life. You realize the Mongols had a secret weapon. They didn't have a lot of time for fussy eaters. You eat what is available, what is necessary, and you are grateful for it. Your brother catches you making a face as you try to chew the bortz, and he just chuckles, a low, rumbling sound that carries the same vastness as the steppe itself. He tells you, through gestures and a few words you've picked up, that it's a taste you'll learn to love. Maybe not, you think, but you'll certainly learn to tolerate it. After the meager lunch, the work continues. You're handed a large piece of sheepskin and a scraper. Your job is to help prepare the hide, scraping off the fat and flesh and then helping to soften it. This isn't just about making clothes. It's about making felt for the yurt's walls, leather for harnesses, and containers for food. You're part of an assembly line that's been running for centuries, each person with a specific role. You find that the work is repetitive, but it's not mindless. You have to be careful, deliberate, and efficient. A mistake here means a ruined piece of hide, which means a significant loss for the family. You realize that in this world, there is no such thing as a superficial skill. Every single thing you do is directly tied to the survival of the group. This is the difference between a modern society where you can be an expert in something obscure like competitive thumb wrestling, and the Mongol Empire, where your expertise must be in something tangible, like preserving meat or making fire. As the day begins to wane, you get to witness the social glue of the community. In the evenings, everyone gathers. Stories are told, songs are sung, and games are played. The children, who have been working all day right alongside the adults, laugh and wrestle. The elders, who seem to possess an encyclopedic knowledge of the land and the livestock, share their wisdom. It's a powerful, intimate moment. You're starting to understand that despite the harshness of the environment, there's a profound sense of community here. This isn't a life of isolated individuals. This is a life of a single functioning organism. Historians still argue whether this strong communal bond was a natural evolution of a nomadic lifestyle or a deliberate result of Genghis Khan's policies to create a unified people. Either way, you're part of it now. You remembered a quirky tidbit. The Mongols had a surprisingly sophisticated postal system, but for daily communication, they just shouted really loudly across the plains. Just kidding.
but it certainly feels like a lot of information is conveyed without a single word being spoken. You settled in for the night, the wind's still wailing outside, and you're no longer just tired. You're profoundly, bone-deep weary.
You're out on the steppe again, herding the animals. The vastness no longer fills you with a sense of wonder. It now feels like an endless, unforgiving prison. Your thoughts drift to the idea of escape, of just riding off into the sunrise and never looking back. But then you remember the stories you've heard, the warnings you've been given, and the cold, hard reality of the law. In the Mongol Empire, there is no running away. You are bound by the yasa, the great legal code laid down by Genghis Khan himself. It is more than just a set of rules. It's the very foundation of this society. It's a force that binds everyone, from the lowliest herdsman to the most powerful Khan. The yasa is an unwritten but universally understood law that governs everything from military discipline to personal conduct. It's the iron fist that holds this sprawling empire together. You learn that one of the most serious crimes is to lie to your Khan or to betray your family. The punishment for such a transgression is swift and absolute: death. There's no jury, no long, drawn-out trial, and certainly no appeals process. If you are found guilty, you are simply executed. This brutal efficiency is by design. In a world where survival depends on trust and loyalty, there is no room for deceit. You recall a quirky tidbit. The yasa also contains strict rules about sharing food. If you are offered food by a stranger, you must eat it. Refusing is considered a grave insult and a breach of trust, punishable by death. It's a stark reminder that in this world, hospitality and social etiquette aren't just polite gestures. They are matters of life and death. You think back to your old life, where you could decline a cookie without being in mortal peril, and you shake your head in disbelief. The yasa also regulates a surprising number of everyday activities. Stealing a horse, for instance, is a capital crime. The horse is the lifeblood of the empire, and taking one without permission is akin to stealing a person's ability to survive. You also hear that adultery is punishable by death, as is any act of disrespect toward elders or shamans. The code is designed to maintain order, to ensure the smooth functioning of a society where everyone has a role and where disloyalty could shatter the entire structure. The law is not for you. You are for the law. This is a profound shift from your modern understanding of justice, where the law is often seen as a tool to protect individual rights. Here, the law exists to protect the collective, and your individual rights are secondary, if they exist at all. This strict legal code is also what allowed the Mongols to create an empire that spanned continents. With the yasa, Genghis Khan created a sense of unified identity among disparate tribes who had spent centuries fighting each other. He made them understand that they were now Mongols, and they were all bound by the same set of rules. This was a radical idea for a nomadic people, and it was a major reason for their success. The yasa wasn't written down in the way we understand laws to be written today. It was primarily transmitted orally, passed down from generation to generation. Historians still argue whether the oral tradition made the yasa more flexible and adaptable, or if it led to inconsistencies and local variations. You just know that it feels like a constant, invisible threat, a sword of Damocles hanging over your head, waiting to drop if you make even the smallest mistake. The constant feeling of being watched, of being held to an impossibly high standard of behavior, is a heavy burden. You can't just be a person here, you must be a Mongol, and that means you must live and die by the law.
The peaceful but grueling routine of herding and family life is shattered one morning by the arrival of a messenger on horseback, his voice booming across the steppe. Your family gathers around, listening intently. It's a summons. The great Khan is calling up a new batch of men for the army. Your brother is already preparing, his face a mixture of grim determination and pride. And you are to go with him. You try to protest, to explain that you're not a soldier, that you're not even from this time. But again, your words are useless. The messenger just looks at you with a cold, appraising eye, as if sizing up a particularly soft piece of meat. You're a male of fighting age in the Mongol Empire, and that's all that matters. You have a body, and the Khan has a use for it. The journey to the military camp is a blur of hard riding and even harder living. When you arrive, you're thrown into a group of 100 men, an arban, the smallest unit of the Mongol army. This unit is the foundation of everything. You will eat with them, train with them, and fight with them. Your life will be inextricably linked to the men beside you. The commander, a hardened veteran with a face like sun-baked leather, wastes no time on pleasantries. The training begins immediately. It's not just about learning to fight. It's about learning to be a Mongol warrior. You're taught how to ride a horse like it's an extension of your own body, how to fire a bow from the saddle at a full gallop, and how to survive on very little. The sheer physicality of it is brutal. Your muscles ache in places you didn't know you had muscles, and you're constantly hungry and thirsty. This is not the clean, sanitized image of a soldier you might have from movies. This is primal. The training is relentless. You practice the feigned retreat, a signature Mongol tactic. The goal is to pretend to flee in terror, luring the enemy into a false sense of security, only to turn and unleash a devastating volley of arrows as they chase after you. It requires perfect timing, iron discipline, and an unwavering trust in the men around you. One slip-up, one person who breaks rank too early or too late, and the entire unit could be annihilated. You're also taught the importance of a horse. You're given a string of 5 horses, and you learn to change mounts mid-journey, keeping the horses fresh so you can cover immense distances at incredible speeds. You quickly realize that the Mongol army doesn't just ride horses. It is a horse, a multi-legged, fast-moving organism. This equestrian superiority is a mainstream historical fact that allowed the Mongols to conquer an empire larger than Rome's in just a decade. The punishments for failure are just as severe as the laws of the Yasa. If a single man in your arban flees from battle, all 10 of you are executed. If a man in your jagun, a group of 1,000, flees, the entire 1,000 are put to death. This extreme policy, a quirky tidbit of military history, wasn't just about enforcing discipline. It was about forging a bond so strong that a man would sooner die fighting than flee and condemn his brothers in arms. It creates an almost unbreakable loyalty, a collective responsibility that binds every soldier to every other soldier. You find yourself looking at the men in your arban not just as comrades, but as a living shield, as people whose lives are now directly in your hands. Historians still argue whether this system of collective punishment was truly effective, or if it was simply a brutal extension of Genghis Khan's desire for total control. You just know that it keeps you in line. You can't afford to be weak, you can't afford to be scared, and you can't afford to fail. Your life, and the lives of the 9 men beside you, now depends on it. The relentless training continues, and you're now a small cog in a massive, terrifying machine. You've graduated from basic skills to tactical formations, and the sheer scale of the army is beginning to sink in. You're part of a tumen, a unit of 10,000 men. Your arban is one of 100 in a jagun, and 10 jaguns make up your tumen. The organization is flawless, a hierarchical structure where every man knows his place and his duty. When the trumpets of war sound, it's not a chaotic mob that rides out, but a single, disciplined force that moves with the precision of a well-oiled clock. You realize that what made the Mongol army so dominant wasn't just their brutal training or their equestrian skill, but their tactical genius. Their strategy was less about brute force and more about psychological warfare and cunning. You practice the feigned retreat again and again, but this time you're part of a much larger group.
The goal is to draw a larger, slower enemy force out of their defensive formation and then surround them with fast-moving cavalry. The battlefield isn't just a place to fight, it's a chessboard, and the Mongols are grandmasters. You learn about the concept of the Mongudai, a skirmishing unit that would harass an enemy with arrows, drawing them out and softening them up before the main attack. This isn't just about shooting arrows, it's about timing, about understanding the enemy's psychology, and about perfect communication between units. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Mongols' tactical superiority was a key factor in their success. Beyond the battlefield, you begin to grasp the incredible logistical feat of keeping this army on the move. The Mongols didn't rely on a long, vulnerable supply chain. Instead, they moved with their livestock, eating dried meat and drinking mare's milk. Their horses were both transportation and food source. This simple but brilliant system allowed them to travel faster and farther than any other army of their time. They could live off the land, and because they didn't need to establish a network of garrisons and supply depots, they could move with astonishing speed. This logistical independence, a quirky tidbit of military history, was a game changer. They weren't just fighting an enemy, they were outmaneuvering them logistically, running circles around armies tied to their slow-moving supply wagons. You also learn about the Mongols' terrifying reputation. Before they even arrived, stories of their ferocity would spread like wildfire, causing panic and often leading cities to surrender without a fight. This psychological warfare was as important as any cavalry charge. The Mongols didn't just conquer territories, they conquered the will of their enemies. You realize that you're part of a force that isn't just feared, but is an almost mythical entity of destruction. This is an uncomfortable thought. You're not a hero, you're a weapon, and your purpose is to inspire terror and achieve victory, whatever the cost. Historians still argue whether the Mongols' reputation for brutality was an intentional strategy to intimidate enemies into submission, or a natural byproduct of their nomadic culture's harsh realities. You're just a small part of that reality now, and it's a heavy burden to bear. The roar of the battlefield and the sharp commands of your commander fill your days and nights, and the gentle lullaby of the steppe seems like a distant, forgotten memory.
The training and fighting seem endless, a blur of motion and violence. But then, a new element is introduced, one that seems almost out of place amidst the brutality. You and your unit are assigned to a different kind of duty, manning a station on the Yam, the Mongol Empire's incredible postal system. You're told that this network of relay stations is the nervous system of the empire, the thing that allows the great Khans to govern their vast territories. It's a remarkable piece of engineering and logistics, a testament to the Mongols' administrative genius. The Yam, in its time, was the fastest communication network the world had ever seen. The job is simple but demanding. Your station is a small collection of yurts, well stocked with fresh horses and food. When a messenger arrives, you must have a new, rested horse ready to go within minutes. There is no time for rest or chit-chat. The messenger simply hands off the letter or message to a new rider, who then thunders off to the next station, often riding for days on end without stopping for more than a few minutes. You are a small, vital link in a chain that stretches for thousands of miles, from the heart of the steppe to the farthest corners of the empire. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Yam allowed the Mongols to govern their territories with unprecedented efficiency. A message from the western edges of the empire could reach the capital in a matter of days or weeks, a journey that would have taken a conventional army months. You learn that the messengers are not just ordinary riders. They are a select group of men known as ulagchin, who are trained for this specific duty. They are given special tablets, known as paisa, that identify them as official representatives of the Khan. These paisa are like a modern-day passport and credit card combined, giving them the authority to demand fresh horses, food, and shelter from any settlement they pass through. This system, a quirky tidbit of Mongol history, meant that the Yam didn't just rely on designated relay stations, it could commandeer resources from anyone, anywhere. This total control over resources was a key reason for its effectiveness. But it also made the Yam a source of resentment among some of the conquered peoples, who saw it as a burdensome tax. As you spend your days at the station, you begin to appreciate the scale of the empire in a different way. You see not just soldiers and war machines, but merchants, diplomats, and scholars using the Yam. It's a two-way street of information and influence. The Yam carried not only military commands and intelligence, but also administrative decrees, tax reports, and diplomatic correspondence. This allowed the Mongols to maintain a tight grip on their vast territories and to respond quickly to threats and opportunities. Historians still argue whether the Yam was primarily a military tool or a civilian one. Was it designed to facilitate conquest and control, or did it also serve to foster trade and cultural exchange? From your perspective, it feels like both. You see the steely-eyed messengers carrying orders of war, but you also see the occasional scholarly-looking figure carrying scrolls and maps. The Yam is a testament to the fact that the Mongols, for all their brutality, were also brilliant administrators. It's an almost unimaginable thought that such an immense network could be built and maintained by a nomadic people. It makes you feel like you're part of something truly massive, something that changed the world in ways you are only now beginning to comprehend. The lonely howl of the wind on the steppe is now punctuated by the thunder of hooves, a constant reminder of the empire's power and reach.
Your time on the Yam station gives you a new perspective on the empire, one that isn't just about warfare. You see the constant flow of information and people, and you start to realize that the Mongol Empire wasn't just built on the backs of horses and the tips of arrows, it was also built on cunning diplomacy and shrewd political maneuvering. You see envoys arriving from distant lands, their colorful robes and strange languages a stark contrast to the rough practicality of the steppe. You watch as they are given a fresh escort and sent on their way to the Khan's court, a place of immense power and intrigue. The Mongols, you learn, had a very clear and simple diplomatic policy: submit or be destroyed. There was no middle ground. When a new territory was approached, the Khan would send a letter to their ruler. The message was always the same, a mainstream historical fact of Mongol diplomacy. It would be something along the lines of, "By the will of eternal heaven, we are the rightful rulers of the world. Submit to our authority, pay tribute, and we will protect you. Refuse, and we will send our armies to destroy you." This was not an idle threat. The Mongols had a reputation for keeping their word, both in protection and in destruction. They would often give a city or kingdom a single chance to surrender peacefully. If they refused, the subsequent conquest would be so brutal and complete that it would serve as a warning to all who came after. You also get to see the flip side of this. One day, a foreign envoy arrives, not from a kingdom, but from a merchant guild. He's here to ask for protection for his trade routes. You see a flicker of a new idea in the eyes of the Mongol official who greets him. The Mongols understood that a prosperous trade network could bring immense wealth to the empire. They were not just conquerors, they were also administrators who recognized the economic benefits of stability. This leads to a quirky tidbit. Genghis Khan, in a bid to secure trade, once dispatched an embassy of merchants to the Kharazm Empire. When the local governor had them all executed, it gave Genghis Khan the pretext he needed for a full-scale invasion. The lesson was clear: don't mess with Mongol merchants. The diplomatic world of the Mongols was a high-stakes game. They were masters of using fear and reputation to their advantage. They would often exaggerate the size of their army or the ferocity of their soldiers, knowing that a panicked enemy was a half-defeated one. They were also experts at using the divisions among their enemies to their advantage, playing one rival against another.
You realize that the empire's power wasn't just about brute force, it was about the art of the deal, Mongol style. Historians still argue whether this expansionist foreign policy was driven by a genuine belief in their divine right to rule the world, or if it was simply a pragmatic response to the geopolitical realities of the 13th century. From your perspective, watching these envoys come and go, you get the sense that it's a bit of both. The belief in their destiny gives them the drive, and the pragmatism gives them the strategy. You're a small part of this grand scheme, a witness to the inner workings of an empire that is much a political entity as it is a military one.
After your stint on the Yam, your orders change again, and you find yourself no longer just a soldier or a postal worker, but a protector of a different kind. You're now part of a small detachment assigned to a merchant caravan traveling along the Silk Road. The caravan is a motley collection of camels and wagons, laden with spices, silks, and other goods from distant lands. Your job is to ensure its safe passage. This is a side of the Mongol Empire you never expected to see, one of commerce, profit, and relative peace. It's a vivid demonstration that the Mongols were not just a destructive force, they were also a stabilizing one, the very reason a caravan like this could even exist. You find yourself riding alongside merchants from Persia, China, and even a few who claim to be from the Western lands beyond. They speak a dozen different languages, but they all share a common understanding. The Mongols, for all their fearsome reputation, have made the Silk Road safer than it has been in centuries. Before the Mongols, the trade routes were a patchwork of warring kingdoms and bandit-infested territories. A journey that might take a year to complete was fraught with danger at every turn. Now, you're part of the reason it's different. The Mongols have brutally suppressed the bandits and established a single, unified authority over a vast expanse of land. This unprecedented stability, a mainstream historical fact, is what allowed the Silk Road to flourish during the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol Peace. You can see it in the way the merchants move with a certain relaxed confidence. They know that as long as they pay their taxes to the Khan and respect the law, their goods are safe. You also learn about the Mongols' surprising economic policies. They were not just interested in plunder. They understood that a healthy trade network meant more taxes and more wealth for the empire. They actively encouraged commerce, offering tax incentives to merchants and even protecting them with armed escorts like your small unit. You hear a quirky tidbit from one of the merchants, a man named Rashid from Samarkand. He tells you that the Mongols created a kind of medieval credit system where merchants could borrow money from a kind of early banking system at low interest rates. This encouraged them to take on bigger, more profitable ventures. It's a level of economic sophistication you never would have associated with the nomadic warrior culture. It's a funny thought. You're not just a soldier. You're a kind of medieval armed security guard for a globalist economy. As you ride, you see the evidence of this new era of connection everywhere. You pass other caravans laden with goods you've never seen before. You hear snippets of conversations in languages you don't understand. Ideas, technologies, and even diseases are traveling along this road, just as silk and spices. The Mongol Empire, by unifying this massive territory, has created a kind of global village. Historians still argue whether the Mongols' role in this was a deliberate act of enlightened policy or a happy byproduct of their military conquest. Did they set out to foster trade, or did they just realize that a prosperous empire was easier to tax and control? You just know that for the first time since you arrived, you feel a sense of purpose that isn't just about fighting and survival. You're part of something that is building, not just destroying. The creak of the wagon wheels and the low rumble of the camels feel like the heartbeat of a new, interconnected world.
The caravan journey continues, and you're now several weeks into a new, temporary routine. You're riding alongside the merchant, Rashid, and you find yourself in conversation, learning more about the intricacies of Mongol society. One day, you ask him about the women. You've noticed that back at your nomadic camp, the women seem to have a lot of power and responsibility. Rashid confirms your observation, and you get a fascinating glimpse into a social structure that is profoundly different from the European model you might have been familiar with. In Mongol society, women were not confined to the home in the way they were in many other cultures of the time. They were integral to the survival of the family and the tribe. They were responsible for a huge range of tasks, from raising the children and managing the household to tending the livestock and even riding and fighting alongside the men if necessary. You recall a quirky tidbit. Mongol women could own property and inherit land, a right that was rare and often non-existent for women in the feudal societies of Europe and Asia. This economic independence gave them a level of autonomy that was almost unheard of. Rashid explains that this wasn't an act of enlightened feminism, it was a pragmatic necessity born of the nomadic lifestyle. The men were often away on long hunts or military campaigns, and the women had to be strong, capable, and self-sufficient to keep the family alive. You also learn that women had a great deal of influence in political matters. Genghis Khan's own mother, Holin, was a powerful and respected figure who helped him unite the Mongol tribes. Later, his wives and daughters played crucial roles in the administration of the empire. After Genghis Khan's death, several women, known as the Great Hatuns, ruled the empire in their own right as regents, wielding immense power and making key decisions about military campaigns and succession. This is a mainstream historical fact that completely upends the stereotype of the Mongol Empire as a purely male-dominated warrior culture. The women were not just in the background, they were at the heart of the empire, a silent but powerful force that guided its destiny. You ask Rashid if this meant there was a kind of gender equality. He smiles and shakes his head. Not in the way you might think, he says. It was more like a balance. Men and women had different roles, but both were equally vital. They were two halves of a whole. He explains that women's power was often exercised behind the scenes, through the influence of their husbands, sons, and daughters, but it was no less real for being subtle. A wife's counsel was often sought on important matters, and a mother's word was law. Historians still argue whether this unique status of Mongol women was a true reflection of gender equality or simply a practical adaptation to a demanding way of life. Was it a proto-feminist society or just a highly pragmatic one? You just know that it feels different. It's a society where a woman's strength is not just admired but expected, and where her voice is not just heard but listened to. As you ride along the Silk Road, you look at the other caravans, and you notice the women there, riding their own horses, managing their own affairs, a testament to a world where a woman's power was as vast and open as the steppe itself.
Your journey with the caravan eventually ends, and you're reassigned again, this time to a small garrison far from the front lines of conquest. The change of pace allows for a different kind of observation. You're in a new territory, a place where people worship a different god and speak a new language. But you notice something remarkable. No one is trying to force them to convert. The Mongols, you learn, have an incredibly tolerant attitude towards religion. In a world where religious wars and intolerance were the norm, the Mongol Empire stands out as a beacon of religious freedom. You see a bustling marketplace where a Buddhist monk, a Muslim imam, a Nestorian Christian priest, and a shaman all stand in close proximity, each ministering to their own flock. There is no conflict, no tension. The rule is simple and absolute. You are free to worship as you please, as long as you are loyal to the Khan and pay your taxes. This policy of religious tolerance, a mainstream historical fact, was not born of any great philosophical ideal. It was a pragmatic decision made by Genghis Khan and his successors. They realized that trying to force a single religion on a vast, multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire would only lead to rebellion and instability. It was far easier to let everyone worship in peace and simply demand their loyalty and obedience. You also get a deeper look into the Mongols' own spiritual beliefs. Their traditional religion is a form of shamanism, a belief system based on the veneration of the sky god Tengri and the use of shamans to communicate with the spirit world. You see shamans performing rituals, divining the future from the cracks in a scorched sheep's boulder blade, or communing with ancestors. This spiritual world, a quirky tidbit of Mongol culture, is deeply intertwined with their daily lives. They believe that the spirits of their ancestors watch over them, and that every action they take is under the watchful eye of the eternal blue sky. This is not a religion of dogma and scripture. It is a religion of connection to the natural world and to the history of their people. This religious tolerance had a profound impact on the world. It allowed for the free exchange of religious ideas and technologies. Christian missionaries traveled to the Mongol court, bringing with them not only their faith, but also knowledge of European science and medicine. Muslim scholars and artists flourished under Mongol rule, and their contributions in fields like astronomy and mathematics were spread throughout the empire. This created a kind of intellectual melting pot, a cross-pollination of ideas that was almost unheard of. Historians still argue whether this tolerance was a true reflection of the Mongols' lack of religious conviction or a cynical political tool to maintain control over a diverse empire. You just know that it feels different. It's a world where the idea of a single correct path to God seems foreign. Here, all paths are tolerated, all are considered valid, as long as they don't get in the way of the Khan's will. You find a kind of strange peace in this, a sense of quiet acceptance that feels profoundly different from the rigid, dogmatic societies of your own time.
The garrison life is a quiet one, a stark contrast to the brutal conquests you've witnessed or the frantic pace of the Am. But the empire's reach is long, and your orders change once more. You're now a part of a small detachment sent to the northwest, to a territory known as the Golden Horde, a part of the Mongol Empire that covers the vast steppes of what we would call modern-day Russia. The landscape is different here, more forested with wide, slow-moving rivers. The people are different too, Slavic peoples, primarily farmers and merchants, living in a loose confederation of principalities. They are not just a conquered people, they are a vassal state, a kingdom that pays tribute and gives fealty to the Great Khan. You spend your time with your detachment, overseeing the collection of taxes, enforcing the law, and making sure the local princes stay in line. You see firsthand the Mongols' brutal efficiency in governance. They don't necessarily rule directly. They rule through a network of local proxies, the very princes they conquered. The princes are allowed to keep their thrones, their titles, and their local power, but they are subject to the will of the Khan, and they must come to the Golden Horde's capital, Sarai, to receive a yarlik, or charter, to rule. This long-lasting, complex, and often brutal rule over the Russian principalities is a mainstream historical fact that shaped the course of Russian history for centuries. The Mongols were not just a military force, they were a political one, and they held their vassals in a tight, unyielding grip. You also see the surprising ways in which the Mongols' presence has changed the local culture. The Russian princes, in their desperation to gain favor with the Khan, adopt Mongol customs, dress, and even names. The very structure of the Russian state is beginning to be shaped by this long period of Mongol domination. You hear a quirky tidbit from a local merchant, a man with a beard the color of dried hay, who tells you that the Russian word for money, denga, comes from the Turkic word tamga, which means tax or stamp. It's a small but powerful example of how deeply the Mongol influence has penetrated every aspect of life. Even the very concept of money has been reshaped by their presence. The Golden Horde is not just a place of tribute and subjugation, it's also a vibrant hub of trade and culture. The city of Sarai is a cosmopolitan metropolis where people from all over the known world, Arabs, Persians, Italians, and Russians, come to trade. The Mongols, who had a pragmatic approach to commerce, turned the Golden Horde into a commercial powerhouse, linking the trade routes of the East with the markets of Europe. Historians still argue whether the Mongol rule over Russia was a dark age that held it back its development, or a period of consolidation that ultimately paved the way for the rise of a unified Russian state. From your perspective, living in this duality, it feels like both. It is a time of oppression, but it is also a time of connection and transformation. The cold wind on the vast plains of the Golden Horde carries the whispers of many languages and the rustle of coins, a constant reminder of the empire's reach and its enduring legacy.
Your time in the Golden Horde eventually comes to an end, and you are called back to the heartland of the empire. The journey back is a long one, and as you travel, you notice a subtle but profound shift in the world around you. The roads, once wild and dangerous, are now well-traveled and relatively safe. The towns and cities, once suspicious of outsiders, are now bustling with merchants from every corner of the known world. This is the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, and you are traveling through its very heart. It is a period of unprecedented stability and peace, a brief era of global connection that you are now living in. The mainstream historical fact of the Pax Mongolica is that it allowed for an explosion of trade and cultural exchange across Eurasia. The Mongols, by unifying a massive expanse of territory and enforcing a single legal code and system of governance, created a kind of medieval free trade zone. The Yam, which you once worked on, is now a bustling highway of ideas, goods, and people. You see merchants from Venice carrying precious glass, alongside scholars from Baghdad carrying texts on astronomy, and artisans from China carrying the secrets of silk production. This cross-pollination of cultures and technologies is happening on a scale that would have been unimaginable just a generation ago. You hear a quirky tidbit from a fellow soldier, a grizzled veteran who has seen more of the empire than you. He tells you that the Mongols were fascinated by new technologies and ideas. They actively sought out artisans and scholars from conquered lands and brought them to the capital, where they were given resources and encouragement to continue their work. The Mongol court was a kind of intellectual hub, a place where people from all over the world could come together and share their knowledge. This deliberate policy of cultural exchange, a kind of pre-Renaissance think tank, was a key factor in the rapid spread of technologies and ideas across the continent. You realize that you're not just a soldier in a conquering army, you're also a silent witness to a kind of globalization that won't be seen again for centuries. The peace is fragile, you know that. The empire is a living, breathing thing, and it is held together by the strong hand of the Khan. But for now, the roads are safe, the markets are full, and the air is thick with the scent of spices and the sound of a dozen different languages. You get a sense of what the world could be like, of a kind of interconnected harmony that seems so modern, so out of place in this rough, ancient world. You see the benefits of the empire's rule, the stability and prosperity that have been bought with so much bloodshed. Historians still argue whether the Pax Mongolica was a genuine attempt at creating a better world or simply the incidental benefit of a brutal military conquest. Was it a peace born of a grand vision or a peace enforced by the threat of violence? From your perspective, you can see both truths. The peace is real, the prosperity is real, and it is a powerful thing to witness. But you also know the dark history that underpins it. The quiet hum of trade and travel is a kind of lullaby, a temporary moment of calm before the storm.
The peace you experienced on your return journey begins to feel like a fading dream. The air in the capital, once thick with the vibrant energy of trade, now feels heavy with a different kind of tension. The tension of a family on the brink of a terrible argument. The great Khan is gone, and the succession is not going smoothly.
The empire, so vast and so powerful, is beginning to crack under the weight of its own success. The internal strife and succession struggles are tearing apart the great Mongol legacy that Genghis Khan worked so hard to build. You find yourself a pawn in a larger game, an observer caught in the crossfire of political maneuvering. The heirs of Genghis Khan, once united under the banner of the eternal blue sky, are now vying for power. They have become less interested in the welfare of the empire as a whole and more interested in the wealth and power of their own khanates. This fracturing of the empire is a mainstream historical fact that ultimately led to the decline of Mongol power. The Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Yuan dynasty in China are all becoming increasingly independent, their leaders turning against each other in a series of civil wars that drain the empire's resources and shatter its unity. You hear a quirky tidbit about the Mongol court, a story whispered in the smoky halls of the palace. It's said that one of the contenders for the throne, a grandson of Genghis Khan, was so suspicious of his rival that he had all the food in the palace tasted by a different servant every day to ensure he wasn't poisoned. This kind of paranoia and fear is now the new normal. The strict, binding law of the Yasa, which once held the empire together, is being ignored or selectively interpreted to justify the actions of rival khans. The sense of collective responsibility that you felt in the army is gone, replaced by a ruthless, every man for himself mentality. The empire is no longer a single unified organism. It's a collection of feuding organs, each trying to consume the other. The once proud Mongol army, the same army that conquered continents, is now being turned against itself. You see units that once fought side by side in a distant land now clashing in a bloody, fratricidal war. The discipline and loyalty that were so painstakingly forged are now being shattered by the forces of ambition and greed. It's a tragic sight, and you can't help but feel a sense of loss. The dream of a unified world, of a peaceful, interconnected empire, is dying before your eyes. Historians still argue whether this internal conflict was an inevitable result of the Mongol Empire's vast size, or if it was a failure of the succession process itself. Was the empire simply too big to be held together by a single ruler, or did the later Khans lack the vision and charisma of Genghis Khan? You just know that the world feels less safe, less stable, and profoundly less hopeful. The thunder of hooves on the steppe no longer feels like a promise of conquest or peace. It feels like the ominous beat of a funeral drum, a sound that marks the end of an era.
The civil wars and succession struggles continue to tear the empire apart, and you find yourself in the twilight of a once great power. The centralized authority of the Great Khan is a thing of the past. The individual khanates are now effectively independent, each with its own ruler, its own laws, and its own ambitions. The empire that once stretched from the Pacific to the Mediterranean is now a collection of splintered kingdoms, a testament to the fragile nature of even the most powerful of empires. You witness the slow, grinding decline. The great cities that once served as centers of trade and culture are now showing signs of decay. The Yam, once the lifeblood of the empire, is now a less reliable network, often disrupted by local conflicts and a lack of central funding. The famous Mongol military machine, once the terror of the known world, is no longer the invincible force it once was. The individual khanates, in their infighting, have weakened their own military capabilities and allowed their enemies to rise and challenge them. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Mongol Empire, as a unified entity, effectively ceased to exist, splintering into smaller, less powerful realms that would eventually be conquered or assimilated by their rivals. You hear a quirky tidbit from an old soldier who fought in the glory days of the empire, a man who remembers the time of the great Khans. He tells you a story of a rival Mongol prince who, in a fit of rage, had a vast library of scrolls and texts burned simply because they belonged to a rival khanate. This act of intellectual vandalism is a sad symbol of the empire's decline, a shift from a culture that once embraced knowledge and new ideas to one that is now consumed by petty rivalries and destruction. The open-mindedness and pragmatism that once defined the Mongols are gone,
replaced by a kind of short-sighted, self-destructive ambition. As you get older, you see the world change around you. The old ways are fading, and new powers are rising. The Muscovite princes who once paid tribute to the Golden Horde are now a unified kingdom in their own right, and they are beginning to push back against their former masters. The Chinese, under the Ming dynasty, have successfully overthrown the Mongol Yuan dynasty and are now building the Great Wall, a symbolic act of defiance against the nomadic conquerors who once ruled them. The world is reasserting itself, and the memory of the great empire is slowly fading into legend. Historians still argue whether the decline of the Mongol Empire was a slow, inevitable process or if it was accelerated by the Black Death, which devastated the populations of the Mongol-controlled lands and disrupted their trade networks. Was it a decline born of internal failure or an external catastrophe? You just know that it feels like the end of an era, a long, slow goodbye to a world that was both beautiful and brutal, a world you would never have survived in, but a world that, for a brief, glorious moment, was the center of everything. The wind on the steppe feels colder now, and the silence seems more profound, as if the land itself is mourning the loss of its masters.
The sun, once a symbol of the eternal blue sky that watched over the empire, now feels like just a distant, fading star. The world you inhabit has changed completely. The unified empire is a thing of the past, a story told by old men around the flickering fire. The splintered khanates have either been absorbed, like the Golden Horde, by the rising power of Muscovy, or have faded into obscurity. You've lived through the rise and fall of one of the greatest empires the world has ever known, and now you are left with its echoes. The legacy of the Mongols, however, is not a quiet one. It is a loud, ringing sound that resonates throughout history. You see it in the world around you. The world is more interconnected now, thanks in large part to the trade routes and cultural exchanges fostered during the Pax Mongolica. The technologies and ideas that traveled along the Silk Road, a mainstream historical fact of the Mongol era, have taken root in new lands. Gunpowder, the compass, and printing, all Chinese inventions, were spread to the West thanks to the stability of the Mongol Empire. This influx of knowledge helped spark the Renaissance in Europe, a period of unprecedented intellectual and artistic growth. The Mongols, for all their brutality, were the unexpected catalysts for a new age of innovation. You also see the legacy of the Mongols in the very people around you. You hear a quirky tidbit from a passing scholar, a man who has devoted his life to the study of history. He tells you that the Mongols left a genetic footprint that can still be found in the populations of Eurasia today. Studies have shown that a staggering percentage of men in Central Asia and beyond share a common paternal lineage, a genetic marker that is believed to have originated with Genghis Khan himself. It is a powerful reminder that the empire's reach was not just political or military, it was a deeply personal and biological one. The blood of the conquerors still runs in the veins of the conquered, a testament to the long and complicated history of the region. As you look at the stars, you think about the empire, about the brutal training, the unforgiving laws, the surprising acts of tolerance, and the final, self-destructive unraveling. It was a world you wouldn't have lasted a day in, a world that was both terrifying and magnificent. Historians still argue whether the Mongol Empire was a net positive or a net negative for humanity. Did their conquests lead to more death and destruction than any other empire, or did their unification of Eurasia and their fostering of global exchange ultimately lead to a more interconnected and prosperous world? The answer, you realize, is not a simple one. It's a messy, complicated truth that lies somewhere in the middle. The empire was a force of destruction, but it was also a force of creation. It was a whirlwind of change that swept across the world, leaving behind a new landscape, a new way of thinking, and a legacy that continues to shape our world today. Now, as the moon rises high over the endless steppe, let's ease out of this long, winding journey. The winds of the empire have finally quieted.
The thundering hooves are now just a faint whisper in the distance. The vast, starry sky above you is the same one that Genghis Khan and his armies saw, a constant, silent witness to the rise and fall of great powers. You are safe now, warm in your own bed. The cold of the steppe is gone. The taste of Irag and Bortz is just a memory. The weight of the Yasa, the burden of being a soldier, the fear and the wonder, all of it is fading away. The sun will rise again tomorrow, but in a world that is different from the one that you've just visited. So close your eyes, let the soft hum of the fan take you away, and drift into a peaceful sleep. You've survived the Mongol Empire, and now it's time to rest. Sweet dreams.